Howdy y'all, Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee, and in my last video I spoke briefly about the joy I feel in games that let me get to know people better. I love storytelling games, but I also love games that have no story, because they let us tell our own stories amongst ourselves, and learn more about each other more directly than we can from learning from people's stories they play when they're representing another character. And I wanted to talk a little bit about people, and about our expectations of them. You know, I met Patrick Rothfuss at PAX South this year. Spoke with him very briefly. He probably doesn't even remember me, but he's a great guy. I have loved his work for years, but when I say his work, I mean the things he's gotten to do because of his work. He's a guy who has gone out of his way to write books, and, his profession is author. He is a professional writer. But what have I seen of him? Well, I saw a bunch of Penny Arcade Dungeons & Dragons stuff he did. And I saw a talk he gave. They have these talks at PAX where you have folks who, it's called like an evening with so-and-so, or a morning with so-and-so, or a chat with so-and-so. And it's very folksy, Like, you get Patrick Rothfuss up on stage, and he just tells stories or showcases some short work or whatever, and it's enjoyable. But it's not necessarily his product. It's not necessarily his work in the same way his novels are his work. And it's kind of like, let's say you're in college or high school, but college, this sort of thing comes up more often. You might meet somebody and they're really into music, and maybe they're a music major or whatever, or they're really into drawing or illustration or something, and you are excited because this person's really cool, but the first time they invite you to a gallery opening of their work, or the first time that they invite you to an appearance where they're going to be playing their music, you're excited. You want to celebrate them and the things that you like about them already. But there's kind of this little bit of anxiety sometimes, I think, at least for myself, I can't speak for others in this, about whether or not that person's work that they pride themselves on so much, like a core part of their identity, is this artistic element of what they do. A musician prides himself on his music or herself. An artist prides him or herself on their art. And someone can be really good at music and really good at art, but not necessarily make music or art that you necessarily enjoy. It might not click with you, and that's terrifying in its own little way. Now, this is not quite the same with Patrick Rothfuss, because I had, seen him and his stuff he did with Penny Arcade, his humor, his presentations, and I enjoyed his live streams and his Twitter, but I never actually read his books. And so there is not a high penalty for failure here. If I got into his books and I did not like them, I would still get to enjoy everything else that he had ever done. He would never ask me if I've read his books. He doesn't know me. This is not something I should be worried about. But you know what? Kind of in the back of my head, it was like, I'll read his books one day, but I wasn't in any particular rush because he's a cool guy and I already like everything else he does. Why risk having this idea, he's a great author and I love all this other stuff he does. But what if his great books aren't for me? What if I don't enjoy them? And that bothered me a little. So, anyway, I actually picked up one of his books recently. It's called The Name of the Wind, and I actually started to read it. And it is a story about a storyteller. And it is probably the single most intentional work I have ever read, in terms of just line-by-line word choice. There is kind of a tone shift in the entire kind of composition of the work as Rothfuss switches over from like third-person omniscient to first-person narrative as one of the main characters. I don't want to get into big spoilers here, but one of the main characters is from a tradition of people who have traveled and done theater and songs and things like that, and they take this stuff seriously. So when this character decides he's going to tell his story of his life, he does not mess around. And the voice that Rothfuss gives this character is so impressive. And it was reminding me a little bit of our Patreon book club selection for this month, God Knows by Joseph Heller, because in God Knows, it's a memoir kind of narrative from the point of view of King David of Israel, the biblical King David, which you guys probably heard of him. He slew Goliath with a stone, which, I mean, if you're going to hit somebody in the head very rapidly with something small, hey, stones have a great density. And David had a great propensity not only for projectiles, but also for words. He's a famous psalmist and harpist, and there are points where Heller aspires to speak from David's point of view. Even though the whole book is written as a memoir from David's point of view, there are points where he aspires to speak with the fluidity and grace and intention that he ascribes to King David, who is a fairly miserable king, it turns out, at least as written. He has a lot of problems with his sons, with his families, just a lot of issues. And I kind of wonder, just as a side note, how much of that is Heller identifying with the difficulties that one deals with in success. Because Heller wrote what's considered one of the three great novels to come out of World War II, or three great American novels. You know, he's up there with Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, and, you know, it's got to be a big thing. That was like his first real novel that he put out. He's just all of a sudden this great American novelist, and just like how David, slaying Goliath is all of a sudden this great hero to the people of Israel. And that doesn't mean that there were no more trials or tribulations for either of them afterwards. But I feel like maybe Heller appreciated the difficulties that King David was encountering as he tried to manage his success, in essence. But, so I was sitting there and I was thinking, like, it would be wonderful if Patrick Rothfuss would just go and write a memoir from the point of view of King David. If I was going to select somebody to write a story from the point of view of King David, I would want it to be this author. That is how clearly his characters' voices speak to me in terms of, at least the character who has this kind of theater tradition. He just really nails meter and rhyme, and even though the entire story does not rhyme, stories that entirely rhyme tend to get on people's nerves before too long. That's okay. But it's kind of one of those things where the occasional use of rhyme tends to lend itself very greatly to an increased appreciation for the story on the whole. It nails home certain passages or calls attention or recalls attention. It's so easy when you're reading to get lazy. And having a little bit of a break here and now, or then and again, kind of gets the brain rejuvenated, and I appreciate that. Whoa, this is really neat. I don't know what they're building over here, but I'm going to go find out. Sorry, I'm easily distracted by things that are happening around me, but I also want to engage in things in the fictional world. This is not something that scales up entirely to my entire engagement in the world. I am just kidding. One of the reasons I picked up this book is because it's been a hard month. It's been a hard couple months for a lot of folks, and I wanted to find an escape, and I was really pleased to do so. I have no idea what this machine does. Oh, this machine might be the squid farm. It's probably False's squid farm, if I had to think about it. Because it does look really great. And False tends to build things that are well designed and well composed. And I wanted to say a little bit about kind of the other elements of The Name of the Wind. I'm only halfway through it, so I can't give a full book review at this point, nor is this necessarily intended to be a book review, but more of a reflection on the process of writing or enjoying a book, or enjoying something by somebody who you are acquainted with or already like. But yeah, this is a really cool structure. The other elements, though, of Name of the Wind, like the plot and the characters, things like that are not necessarily tied directly to the voice of the main character, I believe would all stand on their own as an interesting fantasy story. You know, a lot of what makes a good fantasy story it's a commonality with what makes a good sci-fi story. You know, in science fiction, having self-consistent systems of kind of technological advances that create interesting questions for the reader. I think that kind of baffle the imagination or kind of bustle you into kind of redirecting your concentration can be really the value of that genre. And so, like, Rothfuss has a great, interesting system of alchemy and magic in the books that would work, even if it was all third person omniscient. The characters and the things that happen to them, the events of the book, the history of the world, it all would stand on its own. But it doesn't have to, because he kind of, went a little bit further. And this is something, one of the running jokes about this author, who I've been to several of his talks or whatever, so I've heard these jokes, is that he takes too long to write his books. But when you are writing from the point of view of somebody who is ostensibly 100 times a better storyteller than you are, then let me just say this. My dad always said in manufacturing, there are 3 things you need to get something done. You need space, you need time, and you need manpower. And so if you're trying to do something that's 100 times as good, you need more of one of those things, or more of all of those things. If you want to have, he's basically unable to scale up the manpower element because he has this model of this world in his head, and space isn't necessarily something that he can't front load sentences. I mean, he can have notes and he can have pieces of this puzzle allocated or thought out, oh, okay, I've worked out this element of the mythology and I want to tie it into a love song here or something there. But it's not necessarily something where he can just pick things up or store them away. He can't pre-write the whole thing. And so then the big trade-off ends up being time. And you know what? Some good things take time. This is the sort of thing where if you want to look at storytelling, one place where I've always gone to hear stories and play games has been PlayOnCon. And back in 2010 at PlayOnCon, I think it was 2010, it was the year that the iPhone 4 came out. And I remember it was at PlayOnCon, I saw my first ever Retina display. And that looked like magic to me. That was just mentally, I was like, whoa, this is insane, And the guy who had it, Spencer Williams, who goes by Devil Turnip Online, he's actually one of the guys who used to do the Chef podcast, which was a big Minecraft podcast back in the day. But at the time, I knew him from his work on Control Point, a big Team Fortress podcast. And he and another friend of mine, Shannon Sarr, who is a comics illustrator and very talented in her own right, we were all sitting around, and he's like, oh, hey, I got these things. They're called, Rory Story Cubes. And I was just like, well, how do they work? What are they? And so he shows me these dice, or he shows us these dice, I should say. And they've got different shapes or symbols or representative iconography on any side of them. And the idea is that you throw them on the ground or the table if you're lucky enough to have a table. We had the ground. And you tell a story. And you kind of use those as cues to make up a story as you go. And it turned out, my wife recently lost her MacBook Pro charger. Not recently in 2010, because I don't think she had one back then, but recently 2 or 3 days ago. Well, actually, she claims she lost it at the same exact time that I got the studio back in October. And I'm pretty sure that is not the case, because I have checked all over the studio. I'm a forgetful person. I will give her the benefit of the doubt that she thinks I maybe took it here, but I did not. Whatever. You know what, though? When you have kids, sometimes you don't get to actually clean the whole house the way you'd like. Or sometimes you have demands on your time, so, you're going to clean later. But, my parents live about 90 minutes away, an hour and a half, for those of you who aren't on the, American time system. And they'll just be like, hey, we're in Nashville for like, we wanted to go to the mall or we wanted to go to this, and now we're outside your apartment. You mind if we come up, hang out, and have a drink, or, run to the restroom or something? And when that's happening, you don't necessarily have time as, the parent of a small child who has clearly been occupying a lot of your time already that day to clean the house fully. So sometimes things get not necessarily tidied, but maybe hided. We just hide them. We just open up the dishwasher and we see it's empty. And we don't necessarily neatly stack the plates and put them all in their proper nested order, or non-nested order in order to ensure optimal cleanliness when we run the thing later. We just open it up and we put all the dishes inside and then we close it. And then we latch it and we wipe the counters frantically. That's a lot faster. And so, if my wife might have had her charger out somewhere and somebody was coming up or something like that, I could imagine in her mind having a MacBook charger plugged into the wall might seem so untidy that it needs to be immediately grabbed and thrown into the nearest cabinet. So I started looking through all the cabinets that we had in the house, anywhere kind of near where she might have had an outlet plugged or something plugged into an outlet. And when I went through our gaming cabinet, I found that I had actually won or received, I guess, depending on how you look at Secret Santa or Dirty Santa games, I had won 3 sets of story cubes at our New Year's party last year. My friends and I don't get to do Christmas together because we're always busy with our families, but we try to do New Year's and have some gift exchange or whatever. And, the way Dirty Santa works is everybody, puts gifts into a pile and then you steal them. And I could go into elaborate rules, but I'll save that for our episode on holiday games and how to take advantage of your friends without angering them. No, I'm just kidding. It's Christmas. You should actually try to do your best to make sure everybody's happy. But if you want to know what to look for if somebody else might be messing with you, I can give you a few hints. So, anyway, I open up our gaming cabinet. I find these 3 sets of story cubes. New in box. Well, not in box. They're in these plastic shells, which were a real pain to open. I thought about doing an unboxing video of just me stabbing the plastic and trying to get it open, but I was like, I will cut myself and bleed out on camera, and they will not give my wife the deposit back on this studio space. That will not be a good investment for me. So anyway, I unwrap the dice, I put them in the little bags, and there's 3 sets. The base set, one with just verbs, and one with adventure words or adventure concepts. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare what you can do with literally years of planning on camera and embarrassing myself to what you can do with literally no planning and people throwing arbitrary demands your way. Now, in the real world, the demands wouldn't be anywhere near as arbitrary as the dice, but, there are things like publishing houses have editors, and you got to prove yourself. And Rothfuss is probably in a position where he doesn't have to prove himself anymore because he's, at the point in his career where he's working with Lin-Manuel Miranda. But I'm sure that he put some thought into what people would want when he was writing his story initially, But let's go ahead. So, anyway, myself and Shannon Sarr and Spencer Williams were all at PlayOnCon in 2010, and Spencer just rolls these dice, and we all try to tell a story. And I don't know exactly what those dice were, and I don't recall exactly what the story was, but I've just rolled the same set of dice to kind of give you an idea of kind of how it went. So we've got 1 die that's an alien face, another a beetle, a third an apple, the 4th a question mark, the 5th a speech bubble, the 6th a tree. Although it's also shaped like a spade, so I could make some sort of card tree out of it. That's not a thing. Those are houses. Anyway, the 7th a book, the 8th a sunflower, and the 9th a lock. And these do not need to necessarily be used by the players in any particular order. These are just kind of imagine these as like chips on the table, and each person could pick one up out of this common pool and then use it to continue the story. So usually the first person is going to want to pick something that is either super mundane because they don't want to be stuck with it later, or super interesting because they want to open the story with a big bang. You know, people just they just jump in sometimes too. So I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna pick one and jump in. So I remember the night the aliens showed up. Would be a good use of one of the dice. That happened to be the first one, but So I remember the night the aliens showed up. And the next person would be like, I was eating an apple under my favorite tree, reading my book, and suddenly I felt something fall on my head. And I said to myself, well, I'm no Isaac Newton, but, that seems to be some sort of gravity drive powered spaceship up there. And then these bug people came out, and they, when they spoke, it was like just these clicks and whistles, and I couldn't understand anything they were saying. And then they touched something like on their neck, and all of a sudden this like visual, like shimmering speech bubble appeared coming out of their mandible. I don't know what the plural is for those, and it just had a kind of like this cycling cipher inside of it, and a question mark eventually resolved itself, And I feel like this might be some sort of universal translator, and I don't know how exactly I'm going to unlock this kind of first contact, because all I've gotten out of this is a single question, and I don't know what they're asking, but I know that they are expectantly waiting a response. And so I kind of bow down, set my book on the ground, pick a single flower, and I hand it to the alien bug man. And we've used all 9 dice. And it was kind of a story. But, what was our real objective with these? We didn't know how to play this game. We just knew, okay, you're supposed to tell a story and try to entertain yourselves. Well, we told a story, but I don't know how entertaining it was, We only had one point of view character, which can work if you have a really compelling character or a really compelling story. And I'm not sure 100% that we did, It's not like improv comedy where there's a clear, goal to, tell jokes and be humorous. And if we had set ourselves at, some sort of particular kind of educational or skill set practice, said, hey, we're going to practice our freestyle rhyming by using these dice, we might have gotten more out of it in the long term, especially with continued practice at some sort of regular basis. But instead, it was just kind of us sitting in a circle on a floor, looking at these dice and saying these sentences, and just kind of being like, well, that didn't really feel very satisfying. And I'm personally sure, Rory, I gotta say, if you're watching this, I Googled you. You are a real person, and so that is a very low likelihood. But you know what? Sometimes these things happen. I just want to say, I mean no disrespect here, but it can be very unsatisfying to say words and pretend that they are a story. And so the more focused you are with what you hope to get out of these dice, if you used these as some sort of randomizing element in some other game or some other more structured play, there's a lot that could be done with them. But you can't just string concepts or words or ideas together and get a story. It requires a lot of thought and intent and patience. And that, I think, is better demonstrated in The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss than any other book I've read. That might not be, I'm not saying, oh, this is the finest work of literature ever created, because there are definitely other works of literature that excel in other ways. But really, I think that Patrick Rothfuss has told a story from the point of view of a warrior poet that I wish Joseph Heller had told in God Knows. I wish King David was represented like this, and in a lot of ways, as I said, he has been. So, anyway, those are just some thoughts I had about Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind and about writing. I'm hoping to use these story cubes. As I said, I think that there's a lot of potential to use these in interesting ways with the right kind of discipline or structure around them. So if you guys are listening to this and you have any funny ideas about ways you'd like to see me use these story cubes in future episodes, I've got 3 sets of 9. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like using all of them or 9 of them. It could be like, hey Joe, I want you to write a song on the spot after you roll 3 cubes. And honestly, the requirements to do improvisational comedic humor can be a lot lighter than the requirements to do, like, writing a story. Which actually really brings us full circle, because Patrick Rothfuss, love his improvisational humor, love his actual work more. So, it's a good day to be pleasantly surprised, and I am. So, anyway, until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. Keep adventuring.